Have a decent break, Professor?
Yeah,
Good.
visited my friend up in Fresno. She had a kid recently, so yeah, it's been a while since we've seen her, so it was nice kind of catching up.
Nice.
We went out to Monterey together too, which is nice because I think, being a new parent is not much you can really do. So it was their first outing in like almost like a year and a half. So it was fun.
Oh,
How about you? Good break?
yeah, didn't really do much. Went up to the mountains on Saturday because they got like 1.5 foot of brand new snow over the weekend.
Nice.
Basically. So that was good fun.
We have to, isn't that project yet? Or project thing today? Yeah, it's right here. I walk, I wiggle too much. I can't correct me see this. It's like the look of surprising in your face, you know. That's what it feels for me. That's today, just. I just figured it was on a good pace. Like, oh, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, it's 1 o'clock. Let's go and get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone's spring break? Short, I know. I wish it was longer too. But we're back, and I guess one of the benefits of having a later spring break is that we have less semester to go in. So we're in week 12, so we have 5 more weeks to go. And then we're at the end of the semester, so it'll be here before we know it. Okay, so with that said, the rest of this class, we are going to be pretty busy. There is quite a lot that we're going to be doing over these last 5 weeks. So I believe, I think you all got my email about it yesterday. So one of the things is the midterm exam, so which is going to be on next Tuesday, a week from today. So just to kind of repeat what the email said yesterday. So the midterm exam, basically same rules as the first exam. It's going to be in class. You can bring a calculator, cheat sheet, writing utensil. In terms of content, it's basically going to cover everything that we've covered in economics after the first midterm. So that's basically homework 4 and homework 5. So there's only 2 homework assignments that's going to be on this midterm exam. And of course, the study guide as well. So the study guide will help you with the with conceptual questions, and then homework 4, homework 5. That'll give you an idea of what the problem solving questions are going to be like. Okay. Format of the exam is basically the exact same. So there's going to be 4 short answer questions. Basically just like the first exam. So you would answer the questions in, maybe a couple of sentences. Maybe I'll ask you to draw a figure or something like that. And then 3 problem solving questions. And so in terms of content, there's going to be rate of return, taxes, replacement analysis, and inflation. And so you can expect the 3 problem solving questions to pull from that pool of problems. Okay. All right. So any questions on the midterm exam for next week? Okay. All right. So yeah, we'll be here. We'll be in here for that one. So yeah, just like last time, there's no plans for a virtual exam. So everyone on Zoom, please make sure you make plans to come to campus. Right. The other thing that we're doing today is we're pivoting, and so we're done with economics. So we're not talking about any money or anything like that anymore in the class, and so we're going to be spending the rest of the time here talking about engineering ethics. And so today we're going to introduce what that actually means, what kind of implications that has for engineering practice as a whole, and then kind of set up kind of the rest of our discussions for the rest of the class. Okay. But I think most importantly, the thing I wanted to do today was I wanted to talk about the details of the final project, what's going to be expected for that. And, just so that you guys can think about start forming groups and think about kind of what kind of a topic that you want to do. Okay. So I think probably we'll spend maybe about the first 30 minutes talking about the project, going over the specifications for that. And then for the last 45 minutes, we'll be talking about just kind of an introduction, just ethics in general. All right. Any questions on just anything that we're going to talk about today or anything I've mentioned so far? Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the project. So I think I shared with you guys already kind of the specifications or the instructions for the project. So I emailed this document out to everyone, but I thought we'd go over it together as a class today. Okay. So the final project in this class. So first of all, there's no final exam, and so the only the last thing you're doing in this class is just this project. So I think the registrar, they've scheduled a final exam time for us, but we're just not going to use it. We're just going to use the final project. Okay. All right. So the idea behind the final project in this class is that it's going to be a case study report on an ethical issue, on an engineering ethical issue that's happened previously. Okay. So basically, you're going to be looking at kind of one of the more famous kind of engineering ethics kind of, most of these are bad things, but there's a couple of good stories in there as well. And you're going to be talking about kind of what went wrong and kind of analyzing it from the scope of not only just engineering ethics, but also kind of the economics as well. Okay. So it is a group project. So you're going to be working together in groups of 4 to 5. And so with our class size, I think we'll have about 9 groups. And so the majority of the groups will be groups of 4. But there are going to be a couple groups of 5. Okay. And so kind of plan around that. Plan around a group of 4, and then maybe if you have kind of a 5th person, then I think we'll have about 2 groups of 5. That's my plan. Okay. And the main deliverables for this project is one, the first thing you're going to be doing is a final presentation. And so in the last week of lectures, so that's week 16, we're going to dedicate that whole week to just final presentations. And so you'll be getting up. I think probably we'll do it virtually. So I think just because I think that's easier for everyone. So you'll be connecting over Zoom. You'll be presenting your slides and then kind of explaining your engineering ethical case study to the class. Right. It's about a 15 to 18-minute presentation. And then the other deliverable is going to be a final report where you're going to present all your findings, all your research in kind of one cohesive document. So that document's going to probably be around 30 to 40 pages. Okay. So the purpose of this final project is basically just to apply everything that we've learned. Engineering ethics, we're only going to be covering it for about a month, but in reality, it's a very rich topic. There's a lot of things that's happened over the years. The purpose of this project is to kind of apply what you've learned and try to analyze, something that's happened already so that, just so that, we don't let it happen again in the future, right? So history is only useful to us if we learn from it and apply it to the future. And so I think by learning from the mistakes of the engineers in the past, we can kind of become better and more ethical engineers in the future. So that's kind of the idea. The other thing is that, there's so many kind of really interesting and really fascinating kind of engineering ethical case studies that, we just don't have time for to cover in the class. And so this project kind of gives you a chance to really dive deep into one. And then, when you come to all the presentations, you'll be able to hear a lot about what the other people of other groups have researched as well. Okay. And each group is going to handle a different case study. So, no repeats. Okay. All right, so that's the idea. And so it's you can kind of almost think of it like a book report. It's kind of probably very different than a lot of your engineering projects that you've done up to this point. So there's going to be very light calculations, and I think probably at least one person in your group is going to be responsible for some economic calculations. But for the most part, it's just researching news articles, researching scientific articles, and kind of synthesizing what you found into kind of one cohesive document. Okay. All right. Any questions on that so far? Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the
question.
requirements. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. You posted for the homework next, that's about due next. Can we use some of that information for our case study, or is the case study specific to a topic that our group picks?
Yeah. So what Luke is asking about is I also posted homework 6, which is kind of the individual case study. So that's kind of almost like a practice kind of report writing, which you're going to do individually. So the case studies that are available on that homework assignment are different than the case studies here. So there's going to be no repeat of information. So we'll talk about that homework assignment later. But basically the idea behind that homework assignment is to kind of get some practice doing kind of this kind of writing, just because it is probably going to be a little bit different than the writing you've probably done in like a lab course so far, and to try to get and for me to kind of it's a chance for me to kind of give you feedback on your writing in terms of what I'm looking for, so that you kind of use that for the final project. But in terms of content, the case studies for the homework assignment are completely different than the ones for the final project. Okay, so let's talk about the requirements. And so basically these are all the different sections that are going to be part of your final report and final presentation. And so I've kind of broken it down into those. So granted, I've basically for each of these different sections, the way that you can kind of view them is that they're kind of analyzing the your case study from a different lens, from a different perspective. And so in these sections, you'll see that I give you a lot of kind of questions to kind of get you started with kind of doing the research on, let's say the historical context. But don't feel like you have to answer every single question, because every case study is very different. So not every question is going to fit into every case study perfectly. And so just kind of consider these questions as kind of like a starting point, and then use that to kind of give you an idea of what I'm specifically looking for in this section. Okay. So the first part of the project is going to be the historical context. And so every engineering ethical case study, or just every historical event in history, it didn't happen in a vacuum, right? So there's always kind of a buildup or lead up of events that kind of led up to kind of the thing that's most publicized, right? And so in the historical context, I want you to, walk me through kind of that progression in terms of, what actually led up to this moment right here. Okay. So I think what people have done in the past for this section is that they've done kind of like a timeline approach. And so they've created basically a timeline, and they've kind of marked down kind of, what are kind of the key events that have happened up into this kind of big kind of ethical case study, right? So having that timeline show me when those events happened and kind of what significance it held towards your actual case study, that's kind of a good approach, kind of a good mindset of what you can take for this section. Okay. So some questions is, if there was a particular project that led to this event, why did the company even engage in this project to begin with? What were they hoping to gain? Okay. What were some of the major technological developments that led up to this event? Okay. What problem were the engineers trying to solve, or what were some kind of moral issues or opposition was there to the project? And so you will see that a lot of these case studies actually did have some kind of objections from some people that may or may not have gone unheard during the project. Okay, section 2. So section 2, this is kind of the engineering part of the report. So even though this is primarily an ethical report, we're still kind of an engineering discipline at the end of the day. So the next section is going to be the technical context. And so tell me a little bit about the technology that's involved in the project, right? So all the case studies that you're going to see at the end, they're from engineering companies on engineering projects, and they were either trying to do something that was really interesting from a technological or engineering point of view, or something completely new, right? And so I want you to kind of explain to me, or take some time to explain to me kind of the logic or the science or the technology behind what they were doing. Okay. And so some things you can answer is, what are the fields of engineering that have been primarily involved in this project? How was the project different technically from some of its competitors at the time? Okay. And so you'll see that, a lot of these projects, a lot of these case studies happen because the company tried to do something a little bit different. Maybe they're trying to be a bit more cutting edge, trying to save some costs, right? And how are they trying to accomplish that from a technical perspective? Right? So that's kind of what I want you to talk about today in this section. Okay. So, definitely feel free to be as detailed as you can during this section, and feel free to kind of show any kind of data or numbers or calculations that you can to kind of show, how this works, right? I've even seen people do kind of like almost like a textbook kind of explanation of the technology. And so one particular topic that last time did a really nice job of was artificial intelligence, or AI. And so, the group that did that last time did a really nice kind of almost like, AI 101 kind of like description in their report, which was I think really nice. And so definitely kind of think from that perspective for this section. All right, next section, economic context. And so this is kind of particularly relevant for everything we've been discussing in this class is, what was the company trying to gain from this, right? So a lot of these projects, these companies were, oftentimes trying to save some costs, or maybe they're trying to earn some money. And that often was kind of conflicting with some of the ethical considerations of the project, okay? So run some calculations here. So definitely use a lot of the tools that we've learned in the class. And so do things like present worth analysis, rate of return analysis, right? It may be hard to find exact numbers for these things just because, they may be buried in lawsuits, or they may be buried in technical documents, but try to see what you can find, and then try to apply some of the some of the methods that we've used in this class to analyze the case study from an economic perspective. And even more importantly, if there's any kind of reparations that the company had to pay, either to try to clean up some kind of environmental disaster or to maybe pay the victims, that's important to account for here as well. Okay. One particular thing that a group did last time that was really nice was, this was a situation they were looking at a situation where a company had to pay tons of money, pay out a lot of money in lawsuits to victims and the governments and things like that, right? They did the economic comparison of that cost compared to, if they were on top of their maintenance, and they were able to kind of pay their and fix things as they came up. And what they saw was there's a huge difference in terms of those costs. And so that would be something good to include in this section. All right, next section, probably the most interesting section, the personnel context. And so who are the major players, who are the major people behind this engineering project, right? So a lot of times, you're going to be looking at kind of maybe the head of the company, the CEO. A lot of times, these kinds of big engineering case studies, they happen due to leadership, maybe setting a particular culture in the company, or maybe it was a particular kind of rogue employee that wasn't doing his job, right? A lot of times these issues came up because of some whistleblowers, and so we'll kind of talk about whistleblowers probably starting next week, about what they can do, what their role is, and how they kind of interwoven into these kind of conflicts. And so definitely spend some time talking about who were the major players in this case study. Okay, the next three sections here are all kind of combined here, and so this is kind of where you really start to apply a lot of the ethical theories and a lot of the frameworks that we're going to talk about over the next few weeks. And so on the one hand, you're going to describe just very simply kind of what the ethical lapse was, right? So given all the context, given all the background of the case study that you've outlined, what exactly happened? What was the main issue? What was the headline in terms of, what was the ethical collapse that happened? Okay. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to analyze that ethical dilemma. You're going to use certain frameworks, and so we're going to go over different ethical frameworks. We're going to talk about that today. How did this decision, violate some of the codes of ethics like IEEE or NSPE? We're going to talk about that today as well. Okay. Was there any conflicts of interest? And how was the interest and safety of the public of Wade compared to kind of what they were hoping to gain from this ethical lapse? Okay, so the analysis of the ethical dilemma, that's kind of where you kind of bring a lot of this kind of things in. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about impact, and so what happened as a result of the case study, what happened as a result of the disaster or the accident or whatever. Okay, how did it affect? How did it directly affect the people involved? So that should be pretty easy to research. But I think another thing that's interesting is, what happened to people that were maybe not directly involved in the incident, right? So one interesting thing that you'll see in the homework assignment is that, as a result of, the Space Shuttle Columbia, that disaster, right? Of course, that had a dramatic impact on the astronauts in the air in the shuttle and all their families involved. But it also had kind of the indirect influence of, space and rocket programs in the US kind of being halted for a very long period of time. There was just no public support for it at all after seeing such kind of a big kind of disaster like that. And so, when you're discussing impacts or when you're looking into impacts of the ethical lapse, don't just look kind of directly afterwards, but try to think kind of long term in terms of what kind of this effect had just in general. Okay. And for some of the case studies that are kind of playing out in real time right now, so some of the more modern ones like AI, Boeing is kind of an ethical case study kind of unfolding in real time before our eyes. Try to predict. And so, what could be the result of this thing, maybe 5-10 years in the future. Okay. All right. Next thing you're going to discuss here is think about what could have been done. And so, now that what did happen. What are some opportunities or what are some places during this entire episode where maybe a more ethical choice could have been chosen to avoid the disaster? Okay, so I want you to kind of take a look at those. I want you to look at least 3 different alternative course of actions and definitely related to all the ethical frameworks and codes of conduct that we're going to look at. Okay. All right, and then finally, the last thing is to talk about the outlook for future situations. So here you're going to do a little bit of future predicting. Okay, so if a situation like this happens in the future, how will society respond? How will it be handled? How did this affect kind of the field in general? Is this going to push the technology back certain years? How does it affect the public trust? Okay, so a lot of things, a lot of factors that we're going to discuss over the next few weeks that you can factor in here as well. Okay. Okay, so those are kind of the main sections of the report, and a lot of those are going to be your final presentation as well. Any questions on any of that? Okay. All right, references, and so of course this is a research report at the end of the day, and so you're going to be looking up kind of firsthand sources. Okay. So each member in your group is responsible for finding at least 3 credible sources, right? So if you have a group of 4, I expect to see 12 references, at least 12 references in your final report. If you have 5 people, then that's 15. Okay. And the key here is credible, and so that's getting much harder nowadays, I think, in a world of social media and things like that. And so at the very least, it should be kind of at least an article or maybe like a report from a credible source. Okay. And so if you want more information about working with credible sources, then I provide you a link here as well. Okay. All right, deliverables. And so there's going to be 4 things that you're going to be delivering for this project for credit. 2 of them are the major things. So 2 are the final presentation, the final report. But then the other 2 are kind of, just because it's a group project. Okay. All right, so the first thing that you're going to turn in, so this is due not this Sunday, but the following Sunday, is an agreement, what I call an agreement of shared responsibilities. Okay. So, whenever you're working in a group project, it's always best to divide the group equally among the team members, just so it's not just 1 or 2 people just carrying the whole group. And so I think what I find helps is that, you look at the requirements. I've kind of laid out to you all the requirements here, kind of decide ahead of time who's going to be responsible for what, and kind of, divvy that up ahead of time, just so that everyone kind of knows what they're responsible for. And so I want you to create 1 document for your group. I want everyone to sign it, and I want you to email it to me by Sunday, April 21st. Okay, so that's next Sunday. All right. The next deliverable is going to be the final presentation. So the final presentation is going to take place during the final week of class. And so half the groups are going to go on Tuesday. The other half are going to go on Thursday. I'm just going to randomize it, and so you have an equal chance of going on Tuesday or Thursday. The presentation will be about roughly 15 to 17 minutes, and you can think of it as kind of like a summary of the contents of your report. Okay. So now with that said, your final report doesn't have to be completely done by the presentation, but you should have enough to present for the 15 to 17 minutes. Okay. Okay. And I do expect everyone to talk during the presentation. So it's not just, again, it's not just kind of one or two people presenting. So everyone needs to have at least a speak. Okay. So I'll release a rubric for that. Okay, and then after the final presentation, the next is the final report. And so the final report is kind of one document that you're going to turn in together as a group. It should have all of the sections above, and it should all be in kind of written in clear and concise language. Okay. Now, this next part is important. So, I do expect, because it is a group project, I do expect, different people to write different sections of the report. That's kind of how it goes for these things. But it should still be one, nice, coherent document. Okay. So that means not only do you have to be responsible for writing your own parts, but there should be at least one or two people in the group that's responsible for synthesizing everything, making sure the formatting is consistent between everything, and most importantly, making sure there's no redundancies. Okay. So with kind of the sections that I've outlined, it is possible that certain sections may bleed into other sections. And so kind of one of the most common things I took points off of in the past was that I saw kind of the identical information from one section to another. And in the worst cases, different team members just use the same reference and they just copied from the same article. And so you want to make sure someone is proofreading your final report, making sure there's no redundancies, making sure to correct any kind of typos or misspellings and things like that. And make sure to account for that in your shared responsibilities as well. So whoever's going to be responsible for synthesizing everything, just keep in mind that that's kind of roughly the equivalent amount of work as kind of one section here. Okay. So whoever's responsible for that, or maybe you have multiple people responsible for that, make sure that's accounted for. And most importantly, make sure that someone does it, because I've gone to a lot of reports where it's different fonts, different font sizes, repeated information, sometimes repeated figures. Sometimes people just screenshot the exact same figure from the same article and just put it in two different sections. And so yeah, you want to make sure you have a clean, kind of presentable report. Okay. All right, so the due date for the final report, this will be the last due date, is going to be Monday, May 20th. So that's going to be the Monday after finals week. And so I know you guys are always really busy during finals week, so I want to give you a little bit extra time after finals week. So it's going to be due that Monday by 11:59 p.m. Okay. And your group only needs to submit once. So maybe just whoever is responsible for synthesizing everything, that person can also be responsible for turning it. Okay. All right, so the last thing that you have to do, and I'll make an assignment for this on Canvas as well, is I want you to basically assess your team members. And so just to make sure that everyone kept up their end of the bargain, I want you to upload a document where you basically assess your team members just to make sure everyone's did their appropriate time. Okay. So I'll be taking these assessments into account when assigning final grades. Okay. So basically the way it works is that for your final project, your group will get a grade based on just the content of the report, content of the presentation, but I may adjust the grades up or down depending on maybe who did most of the work or who didn't pull the weight. Okay. And so that's mostly going to be based on these assessments. So the most ideal case is that everyone does their fair share of work and everyone gets the full credit for the project and full credit for the final report. Okay. So this assessment, I'll give you guys a template for this as well. This will be due together with the final report on Monday, May 12th. Okay. All right. Any questions on the deliverables for the final project? Okay. All right. So next is the final report component. So this is pretty standard. So it's basically all the sections that I had above. Okay. Teams. Oh, that's a typo. We have 38 students in the class, but remember, you're gonna be working together in teams of 4 to 5. So I'll let you guys pick your own teams. And so you guys can feel free to kind of partner up with your friends and stuff like that. If you need help finding a group, or if you don't have a group, just let me know. There's always going to be maybe groups of 3 or maybe groups of 4 that we can add 1 or 2 people to. So but if you could get a group of 4 to 5 together, then that's ideal. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to talk about today are the potential topics. Okay, so these are all the case studies that people have done in the past, or are or are kind of interesting to analyze from an ethical perspective. And it's going to be first come, first serve. And so basically the way that I do this is that, once you form your group, I want you guys to email me as a group to say that, everyone on this email is working together and we want to work on this project. Okay. And so the faster you kind of form your group, kind of the more options that you have for the project. And if multiple groups try to go for the same project, whoever comes second, I'll say, choose something else. Or if you want to be safe, you can send me kind of a top 3 or a top 5, and then I'll give you your highest one that hasn't been taken. Okay. Okay. And so that's the timer for that is basically starting now. So basically, the sooner that you email me, the sooner you get your group together, email me, choose your topic, then you can do it. Okay. So let's talk about the list of potential topics. So I have about 16 here, I think, or 15. So these are the ones that people have done in the past, and these are ones that I've found interesting, just kind of based on current events. But just know that you're not limited to these as well. The only restrictions that you have on the topic is that you can't pick a topic from homework 6. Okay. Okay. So number one is the Boeing. Well, it started with the Boeing 737 MAX, but it's kind of still kind of unfolding today. It's kind of a disaster in the public eye. So it's just Boeing in general, just everything that Boeing has failed to do over the last 10 years. Okay. So this whole story kind of started with kind of 2 kind of really fatal kind of high profile accidents that happened in October 2018 and March 2019. So if you're unfamiliar, there's Boeing designed an aircraft, the Boeing 737 MAX, and basically the pilots of those aircraft lost control, and the airplane basically plunged and it killed everyone on board. So this kind of prompted it was a huge international incident, and put Boeing under a lot of scrutiny. And so what was found out was that during the regulatory process, there was a lot of shortcuts that were made for Boeing, just so that they can compete with Airbus, and that resulted in a lot of kind of safety regulations not being followed, and obviously a lot of deaths. But the more fascinating thing is that it seems like Boeing learned absolutely nothing from that. And today, unfolding, late 2023, early 2024, there's been a bunch of other incidents with Boeing aircrafts, not nearly as disastrous as a fatal plane crash, but doors falling off, engine hoods falling off, whistleblower incidents, people saying that the planes aren't ready, things like that. So yeah, this one's going to be a really interesting one, and I think whoever picks this topic, you're going to have a lot of content. Just from the historical, I think we're at a point right now where everything regarding the MAX has kind of unfolded already in the public eye. But there's also a lot of recent incidents as well. So Boeing is a case study, and here it is. This is the case study on Boeing and how not to run your aerospace company. Okay, next one's a little bit of an older one. So the next one is called the Space Shuttle Challenger, and so this is one of the more famous engineering disasters, right up there with Columbia. So the Columbia and the Challenger are kind of the 2 most famous kind of aerospace engineering disasters. So the Challenger. This was a space shuttle that famously kind of broke apart about 73 seconds after launch, killing all the members on board. And the cause for this was a faulty O-ring that was not properly sealing the conditions within the thrusters. Okay. So after this disaster, the space shuttle was put on hiatus for about 32 months, and discovered that a lot of the cause for this issue was kind of a lot of the culture and kind of the decision making that was within NASA. Okay. So this one also very fascinating. If you're into kind of space shuttles or aerospace, this is a really interesting one to do. I think this one's also interesting because the technical aspects of this are very, very well documented. So this is going to be really interesting to hear about, just kind of sealing and O-rings and what roles they play in engines in general. Okay. Next one is going to be social media and digital privacy. And so this is another one that kind of started out as a Facebook thing, but then there's kind of been some recent developments with TikTok as well. So this case study is a very different flavor, and so this more has to do with our use of social media as a society, and what goes on to what kind of information are these companies collecting from us, and more importantly, what these companies are doing with that data. And so the thing that kicked this off was back in 2018, Facebook faced a lot of scrutiny over its use of data. and it's and how it used the data together with the analytics firm called Cambridge Analytica. Okay. But more recently, there's been a lot of discussion about kind of the newest or one of the newest social media platforms, TikTok, which probably, as you guys know, is owned by a company with close ties to the Chinese government, and so there are concerns now with how that company uses that data, in connection with the Chinese government. So there's been a big push to actually ban the app, from the U.S. or force a sale. So this is another one which kind of happening in real time, kind of right in front of us. Okay, next one is I call the Theranos scandal. And so back in 2014, there was a tech startup called Theranos, a biotech company that basically claimed it could revolutionize medical care. Basically, the way it worked was that you would prick your finger and you get a single drop of blood, and then they could run all kinds of medical tests to tell you if you're going to have cancer, not only today but also 25 years in the future. But turns out it was all a lie, and so it was all just based on fraud. There was no technology; it didn't work the way it did. But it was able to raise, billions of dollars in funding and get all these investors, all based on just kind of research, kind of malpractice. So now their former CEO, Elizabeth Holmes, faces criminal charges. And I think she's finally in jail. I think she evaded jail. She kept popping out kids for 5, 6 years, just saying, oh, I have to be a mom. But then now she's finally in jail, which is kind of, really satisfying and interesting at the same time. So if you're interested in biotech, Theranos is a very fascinating case study. All right, next one is a very classical case study, which is the Citicorp building in Manhattan. So the engineers of this building, basically, they had a very tough challenge. And so there was a church located underneath the building that refused to sell. And so they had to construct the building around the church. But in doing so, they did not account for a certain type of loading from wind. And the building was actually in danger of falling. And so the engineers had to actually come up with a solution after the building was built. But for a long time, that building was standing there kind of endangered. There was kind of a really bad storm in New York. A lot of people would have been in trouble. So, it's a nice story at the end of the day, but also kind of scary to think about, what are some other issues that are kind of being swept under the rug. Okay, next one we have BF Goodrich and the Air Force A-70 brake problem. So this one's kind of an older one. So this was back in 1967. This company called BF Goodrich received a contract to supply the wheels for a new Air Force aircraft. But these designs were faulty. So this is an interesting one because this is a classical case study of a whistleblower and kind of how that affects the company, how it works. So basically, the company was found guilty of falsifying data just to secure the contract, and they've basically just disintegrated as a company since then. All right, next thing we have the case study called the Aberdeen 3. So if you're interested in kind of environmental impacts of engineering, this is kind of one of the bigger, more higher profile cases. And so the Aberdeen 3 refers to 3 engineering managers that were convicted of kind of illegally handling and disposing of kind of chemical waste from a U.S. Army facility. And so if you're interested in seeing how the kind of the environmental effects and how that's affected kind of conservation laws and waste disposal laws, this is kind of a really interesting case for that. All right, next we have Hurricane Katrina. So Hurricane Katrina obviously was a huge national disaster that occurred in the early 2000s. But after the disaster, it was found that a lot of the damage could have been mitigated if their hurricane protection system was kind of kept up to date and up to code. And so this is kind of one, it hasn't really gotten a lot of public traction just because, just the hurricane itself was a huge thing, but there's been a lot that's been discovered afterwards. So kind of a really interesting one to see as well. All right, next one, a fairly recent one, PG&E and California wildfires. And so, you all live in California, so you all know we get wildfires all the time. But what they don't tell you is that a lot of these wildfires are very preventable. And in fact, there's the power company in Northern California, Pacific Gas and Electric, is notorious for kind of being very behind on their maintenance of the power lines and power stations, things like that. And a lot of these power stations have been responsible for some of the more deadly fires that have occurred in Northern California. So again, another kind of a really interesting one. PG&E in particular has gotten a lot of public funds that were supposed to be used to update their infrastructure, but if you choose this one, you'll see that they did a lot of other things with that money that were not very ethical. All right, next we have ASME versus Hydro Level Corp. So this one is a really interesting one that has to do with conflict of interest. This one, if you're into kind of people politics, this is a very interesting one because this is basically what happened was that Hydro Level basically designed a valve that was going to, that was much better than a lot of the valves on the market. But the issue was that, anytime you make any kind of engineering technology, it has to be approved by, the appropriate board. The problem is, the board at ASME, one of the members on the board was an executive at a competitor for Hydro Level, and so they basically kept denying them approval just so that they can make their own valve and make it better. And so this was kind of a very classical case of conflict of interest, and a lot of very petty kind of mudslinging here. So if you're interested in kind of drama and people saying mean things to each other, this is a good case study for that. Okay, next we have Love Canal. So this is it sounds very interesting, but this is also kind of another environmental disaster. So this was a case where they built this huge neighborhood in New York, but it was actually built on top of a nuclear landfill, and so people started getting cancer and a lot of other diseases. And so it's a lesson in terms of how to properly deal with toxic waste and not to build neighborhoods with families on top of this place. So another interesting one there. Okay, next one is so I know there's a lot, but I'm trying to get through these quickly. But next one is the Big Dig collapse, and so there was a big tunnel in Boston called the Big Dig Tunnel in July 2006. There was a huge collapse, which kind of collapsed their entire kind of transportation system. And later was found out that this was due to kind of some negligence in the safety and protocol of the building. All right, next we have Deepwater Horizon. So this one probably a lot of you remember too. This was the huge BP oil spill that happened in the Gulf of Mexico. So again, this was kind of a result of kind of negligent maintenance and just providing safety standards. I think what's more interesting about this is that BP has kind of seemingly turned around its public image, so people kind of forget that they caused this huge disaster. Next, we have the Fukushima nuclear accident. So in March 2011, there was a huge tsunami that hit a nuclear reactor in Japan that caused a near nuclear meltdown. So it caused a huge panic. So over 100,000 people in the surrounding areas had to evacuate because there was the possibility of a nuclear meltdown. This all could have been prevented if they were better with their maintenance. All right, so the last one I have here is deepfakes and AI. So this is very much an emerging technology. Artificial intelligence is able to kind of recreate a lot of kind of images for people. It's able to even recreate a lot of code or reports and things like that. So just discussing the ramifications for that and how this can affect things like political races or things like how different kinds of work like engineering work or artwork is valued. I think there's a lot of things to discuss here as well. Okay, and of course you're not limited to this list. And so if there's another case study that maybe is happening right now, or maybe you're interested in looking into, you can suggest it as well. And so you can run it by me, and I can approve this. Okay. All right, so that was just kind of very quick rundown. I know it was kind of very quick, but hopefully you found a case study that you were interested in, and you can form a group and let me know. Okay. Any questions on any of these potential projects here? Okay. All right. So definitely think about your groups. Definitely think about kind of the projects that you want to do, and then just first come, first serve. And so as soon as you found your group and you make a decision in terms of what you want to do, send me an email, and then you can claim it for you. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about today before we get, well, it's been 40 minutes, and so we've kind of been talking for most of today. Is the individual case study. And so probably a lot of you noticed that I posted this homework assignment. Okay. This is going to be due on Sunday, April 21st, so next Sunday, so you can do it after the midterm. But basically, this is kind of like an individual kind of final project. So the type of writing that you're gonna be doing in this project, is probably gonna be very different than everything that you've done. So I want to give you a chance to kind of try it out on your own, get some feedback from me. At the end of the day, this is a big homework assignment, but it is just a homework at the end of the day. And so it's kind of like a low stakes way for you to kind of try it, kind of, try your hand at researching and get feedback from me in order to kind of improve for your final project. Okay. So after this is due on Sunday, I'm going to go through, read everyone's individual report. I'm going to try to give you as many comments and feedback as I can. And just so that you can use that for your final project. Okay. So for your individual case study, there are 3 different case studies that you can do. So one is the Columbia Space Shuttle disasters. Number 2 is the Kansas City Hyatt Regency walkway collapse. And 3 is the Ford Pinto. So we'll be discussing the Ford Pinto a little bit today as well. Okay. So for the individual case study report, you're going to choose one of these case studies and then write kind of a miniature report on it and then submit it to me for grading. Okay. Make sure you read the rubric for this homework assignment carefully because I didn't include every section. So I did cut things out because this is kind of an individual report. So I don't want you to write a full report here. So I've only included just the historical and personnel context and the key ethical issues. So it's not all the same sections of the final report. So make sure you read the rubric for this. Okay. All right. So that was a lot of talking. So that's your final project and that's your kind of writing assignment in a nutshell. Any questions just on this whole thing? Yeah.
How many pages are you expecting us to write for the individual?
There's not a page requirement, but typically they're around 6 to 8 pages in length. Yeah. But I've seen people write, 5 pages. I've given them full credit. I've also seen people write like 20 pages for the individual ones, and I've given them like D's because it's all just fluff. And so, I'm more looking at the content, not really. But if you want to reference like 6 to 8 is about the average. Okay. All right. So there's a lot to think about. So definitely, get thinking about your final project. Okay. So let's bring it back to Zoom here. Let's bring it back to my. Okay. All right, so you basically kind of got a crash course in engineering ethics just now, or in terms of kind of, or hopefully you got a sense of kind of how we're going to be approaching this for the rest of the class. Right? So today, what I wanted to talk about was kind of just an introduction to engineering ethics. Okay. So, obviously with this topic here, we're making a big change in this class. We're making a pretty big pivot because everything up to this point we've been talking about money, right? How to make the most money or how to pick the most economic efficient option, right? So, that's a very important part of just engineering practice in general, right? You want to make sure that, whatever you're doing or whatever project you're doing in engineering in your professional practice is cost effective and kind of tries to make as much commercial sense as possible. Okay. But there's another side to it, right? And so the other side to kind of your thought process as an engineer is, is my project going to be ethical? And what I mean by that is that, most of the engineering projects that you're going to be working on are going to be used by people at the end of the day, right? So they're going to be used by, maybe just common citizens, maybe they're being used by other engineers, but they're going to be used by people, right? And so as such, as kind of the engineer, kind of as the designer, or as kind of the person kind of responsible for the product, it's your responsibility to know that, whoever's using your product, that they can be assured that it's going to be safe, that it's going to take care of them in the best way possible. So we want to make sure that our product is safe. And kind of beyond that, we want to make sure that we're maximizing the possible good to people while minimizing the negative consequences. So of course, the immediate safety of the people using your product, that's always going to be the number one concern. But also there's also longer term effects as well. So think about kind of what effects our projects are going to have, maybe on the natural environment, maybe what effect it's going to have on the person's kind of identity, right? And so that's kind of a bigger topic nowadays too, where maybe you use some kind of digital service and maybe it doesn't harm you right now, but maybe someone has some information about you that they can kind of leverage later on in the future. Okay, so it's not only just the immediate safety, not only the immediate kind of risks that are important, but also kind of the longer term effects as well. So we want to keep all of those in mind. Okay. So at first glance, this seems pretty easy, right? And so generally speaking, I think for the most part, most people walk around every day, not trying to harm the people around them, right? And so a lot of times, people come into engineering ethics. It's like, oh, I just have to be a good person, right? So, oh, that's easy. I'm not a bad person, right? Well, the thing is, with a lot of large engineering projects with very wide-ranging consequences, it's often pretty complex, and there's often kind of what you'll see. There's no correct answer here, right? Okay. Lots of factors to consider that are both kind of immediate and also kind of long-ranging as well. Okay. And what you'll find is that there's often no perfect answer. There's no way to make everyone happy. Okay. I think that's kind of the hardest part that I think a lot of engineers are kind of have to grasp, is that everything that you've done up to this point, all the math, all the science course that you've taken, every problem has a perfect solution. There's an answer to every problem, right? When it comes to ethics, when it comes to these kinds of issues, there probably isn't a perfect solution, and there's maybe the solution that you pick maybe just does a good job of minimizing all the negative consequences, but also maybe that's not the right answer either, right? And so it's ethics is a very interesting topic, and it's one that I wish we had kind of more time to explore. But in kind of the amount of time that we have left, the most that we can really do is just kind of talk about a lot of case studies, talk about what people have learned from there, and just to kind of give you a sense of kind of the different considerations that people have to make. But if you really kind of want to do a deep dive in terms of ethical decision making, what that looks like, kind of doing kind of a value proposition, cost benefit analysis of a lot of these things, we can spend months doing that, but we don't have months. We only have just one. So the way we do it here at Cal State Fullerton, we kind of pair ethics together with economics, because a lot of times what you'll see is that those two factors, kind of the economic side, the financial side of a project versus the ethical side, you'll find that these two things often come at odds with each other. You kind of have to make a decision where, one side is not going to be happy. Okay. And so to kind of introduce that, I want to tell you kind of a very classical story. So this is a case study that's gone over in every single engineering ethics class. And in fact, you can write about it in your individual case study. which is the case study of the Ford Pinto. So has anyone heard of the Ford Pinto before? Has that kind of name kind of ring some bells? Yeah, so it's pretty famous at this point. So people kind of know. So if you're not aware, in the 1970s, Ford made a subcompact car called the Pinto. I'm going to do my best to draw it, but of course, I'm not an artist, so it might look something like this. You don't have to draw a car. This is just me kind of giving you a visual kind of what it looks like. There you go. Just so you know, it's a Ford. Okay. All right. So the Ford Pinto, it's a subcompact car. So why is it famous? And so it's famous, and so if you look on the road today, you will not see a single Ford Pinto, or you shouldn't anyway. And there's a very good reason for that, is because the Ford Pinto became famous for all the wrong reasons. Okay. So I'll give you kind of, there were a lot of incidents that kind of led up to this, but I'll give you kind of the most famous one. Okay. On August 10th, 1978, okay, there was an accident on the freeway involving a Ford Pinto. Okay. So of course, that's never fun, right? So if you've ever been rear-ended before, you know that it's not a fun experience. You have to get out of your car, you have to talk to the person, you have to get their contact information. They're probably going to blame you for it. You have to get insurance involved, and it's not pleasant, okay? But this is more than just kind of a simple rear-ending, right? And so what happened after this Ford Pinto was rear-ended was that the fuel tank actually ruptured and it actually exploded and killed everyone inside the Ford Pinto. Okay. And so, of course, that's not something you expect to happen when you get rear-ended, right? So cars today are designed where the fuel tank isn't back there, and so you get rear-ended. The worst thing probably your bumper's kind of smashed in. That cake you were having in your trunk is now smashed, but you generally don't expect your car to blow up. Okay. So the reason this happened was because of the design of the Pinto itself. Okay. So the way the Pinto was designed was that to kind of make this kind of subcompact car, to kind of make it kind of in the weight class and the price that Ford wanted to sell it at, the engineers had to make a lot of compromises in the design. Okay. So if you follow kind of the history of kind of cars up to this point, there's the market for subcompact cars at the time was being rapidly kind of flooded by a lot of competitors, especially foreign competitors as well. And so Ford kind of wanted in on that market just because these cars were selling like hotcakes. Okay. And so they were kind of forced to kind of design a car that was to kind of keep up with their competitors. And so basically, the company kind of gave the engineers kind of this, we want the car to be produced under this price and we want it to be on the market by this time. And so because of that kind of schedule and because of those constraints, it caused a lot of compromises in the design of the car, which resulted the fuel tank being placed in a very dangerous spot. Okay. And so the worst part, and kind of why it's become such a big issue, is that this was not a surprise. And so the fact that this explosion happened, the fact that the Pintos were kind of getting lit on fire was something that Ford was aware of. And so in their testing, they basically found exactly the same thing. So when a Ford Pinto was struck from behind, it caused these kinds of issues. But yet, despite knowledge of these concerns, despite knowledge of these issues, Ford still chose to push it to market. Okay. So this is a very classical case where you're given a certain timeline, you're given a certain kind of budget to make a product, and you want to make it kind of as efficiently and as economical as you can. But along the way, you have to sacrifice some of the safety, you have to sacrifice some of the engineering standards in order to meet those things. And so it's a very classical case of kind of economics versus ethics. And of course, in this case, economics won. And Ford has become famous through this for kind of all the wrong reasons. Okay, so I don't want to talk too much about it just because it is a possibility for your writing assignment. So a lot of the details will kind of let you fill in yourself or research yourself if you choose to go that way for homework 6. But I did want to talk about this one just because it's the classical engineering case study, and it's a good one to kind of frame a lot of our discussions for the rest of this. All right, any questions on the Ford Pinto? Good. What's this file? Oh, okay. All right. So that's kind of engineering ethics in a nutshell. Is that a lot of times you're working at these companies, you're designing your products, and you may want to do things in a certain way, which will kind of maximize safety and minimize risk. But oftentimes there's kind of other factors kind of at play, and you kind of have to balance all these things. Okay. So let's talk about just kind of engineering ethics in general. So the number one factor in engineering ethics, or the one thing you have to keep in mind, is safety, right? And so you have to make sure that your products are safe for people to use, okay? But we're going to talk about kind of a lot of other factors in engineering ethics as well, okay? So you've kind of seen a little sneak preview of this because we've talked about all the topics for the final project, but other kind of ethical issues or kind of other issues that kind of fall under engineering ethics are things like bribery, fraud, environmental protection, um, honesty in research or research ethics, computer privacy, and conflict of interest, just to name a few. Okay. So we're going to touch on a lot of these things over the next month. Some of these things we're not going to be able to discuss in kind of heavy detail, just because we only have a few weeks left. But just know that a lot of these things are also kind of fall under engineering ethics as well. Okay. Okay. So how do we define ethics just in general? Okay. So ethics is basically the study of the characteristic of morals. Okay. It's to study the characteristics of morals and the moral decisions or moral choices that are made by individuals and companies. Okay. I think oftentimes you don't think about just ethics in general, but I think just the context that people hear about ethics is whether or not a certain decision or a certain kind of choice was ethical or not. Okay. So I think in that context, ethics is kind of used more in a more kind of a subjective kind of way, or more kind of a colloquial kind of way, right? So typically we say that an ethical decision, right? Kind of in the way that I think a lot of people understand the word ethical, is that an ethical decision is one that kind of prioritizes the public good or kind of the good of society kind of over individual greed or individual desires. So that's usually the context of where we hear the word ethical, at least in kind of today everyday speak. Okay. So when you're talking about the case studies and kind of some of the decisions that these engineers or companies made, right? A lot of times we'll kind of assess these or kind of grade these decisions as either ethical or not, based on kind of the harm to the public or the harm to the society that it caused. Okay. Okay. So of course, this is very different, right? And so this is very not typical of what you experience in a typical engineering class. And so there's no formulas for this. There's no methodology. There's not even kind of a black and white kind of decision of like, oh, that was an ethical decision, that was an unethical decision, right? This is very much kind of like an art or humanities type of subject. Okay. And I'll tell you right now, I'm not an arts and humanities type of person. I'm very much an engineer like you guys. And so it's not a subject that we're going to get like a full kind of ethical kind of moral treatment for. Okay. And with the time that we have left in the class, there's really only there's limitations to what we can do. Okay. So I'm going to be upfront and kind of honest with you that the way I kind of approach this section of this class is to kind of just look at history. So look and see kind of what has happened a lot before in terms of case studies and disasters, and try to learn from those as much as possible. Because even though likely whatever ethical dilemma that you face in your career, probably is going to be different than what's happened in the past. But by gathering all this experience of what's happened in the past and the mistakes that people have made, that can help you try hopefully avoid making similar mistakes in the future. Okay? Because there's a lot that we can learn, right? So maybe not exactly in the technology, because obviously technology is always improving. You're going to be working on kind of different systems, different technologies, but kind of the mindsets and kind of the conflicts of interest that past engineers have had, we can learn to kind of take that. Okay. But also keep in mind that we are going to be doing a lot of case study reports, and it's very easy to kind of sit where we are in 2024 and say like that was wrong, or that was kind of the wrong thing to do, right? It's like obviously, like a big disaster has happened. How could they do that, right? Those engineers are terrible people, right? Those are always easy to that's always easy to say in hindsight after something happened. But keep in mind that kind of put yourself in the shoes of these engineers that a lot of times they didn't know what was going to happen, right? And in fact, a lot of these engineers, and all of you guys as well, you're going to be making decisions, and you're going to be making choices where you don't have all the information available to you. Okay. And so I think if you go back into a lot of these case studies and you tell engineers that this is what's going to happen, right? If you design the Pinto this way, then it's going to burst in flames, and it's going to do so in kind of a spectacular way. Of course, they would go back and change their decisions, right? I think a lot of engineers would rather lose their job than rather kind of be attached to a disaster like that. But a lot of times, you don't really know that, right? Or at least you don't have certain knowledge. And so the best thing that we can do as engineers is we can try to be aware of the risks. And try to minimize those risks as much as possible. But keep in mind that it's impossible to eliminate all risks. Okay? So just keep that in mind, right? So even the most mundane task, right? Even the most mundane task of me turning on the iPad to start a lecture, right? There's a chance, it's probably 0.000000001% chance that my iPad just explodes and kills me, right? And so it's impossible to kind of prevent that from happening, but we can try to minimize that as much as possible. And that's kind of the game that you're playing as engineers. Okay. Now, this comes under. Now, this is not an excuse to kind of absolve lame as well, right? So if you take the engineers at Ford, right, they were aware of these risks, right? They knew them in testing, but the argument that's had there and the reason that they were found liable for all these injuries was that they didn't do their due diligence. They didn't try to minimize these risks. They just tried to push the car out to try to, maximize market profitabilities as much as possible. So there's a fine line here, and there's a lot of gray area in terms of what counts as minimizing the risk and whether that's a reasonable amount of effort that you can do. Okay. And I want to emphasize that, and that's kind of the last thing I want to emphasize today, just because I think in kind of the world that we live in now, there's a lot of very reactionary kind of black and white kind of takes that you'll find on social media, where it's like something happens, like, oh, of course, they should have known this was going to happen and it's their fault. They knowingly did this and they killed people on purpose because they didn't account for this. And so, maybe it's not that extreme, but there is accountability to be held. And so, this is not to say that people shouldn't be held accountable when things happen, but just know that it's definitely a lot more complicated than kind of what the headlines or kind of what the reactions tell you, right? Because when you work on such large, such complex systems, there's just naturally going to be risks involved, right? You get into your car. Getting into your car every day to come to campus is a huge risk, actually. There's things that can happen to your car. You can't account for what the other drivers on the road are going to be doing, and so it's impossible to eliminate all the risk, but we always have to kind of ask ourselves as engineers, are we doing everything we can to minimize these risks as much as possible? Okay. And that's kind of where the difference is found. All right. Any questions on any of this? Okay, so let's end a little bit early today. So just because I don't want to get into the next thing just yet. But most important thing for today, make sure you're thinking about forming your group. So definitely talk to your friends. If you don't think that you can get a full group together, let me know. Maybe you have one person you want to work with. Just both of you may email me, and then maybe I can try to put you into another group. Okay. But let's try to move quickly on the group. So make sure you guys are forming your groups. Choose your topic, just so that you can get the ball rolling on your final project. Okay. All right. So thank you guys for coming to class today. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I will see you guys on Thursday.
We should have talked.
We have one other.
I figured so far, bowling is the only two that we agree on. By the space shuttle. I also really like the airports, I mean, that's. Like everything on it is built.
I'll get all my work done. You guys want to do like getting together.
I like the. I mean, I don't know.
Working 3 days. I mean,
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. She sent it down.